Hi everybody. This video I've created is to help you understand the basic concepts of the autonomic nervous system. So if you have your lecture outline in front of you, where I'm going to be starting is at Roman numeral 1, comparison of the somatic and autonomic nervous system. I'm going to start by drawing a couple of pictures. I know this always looks like a cloud and a lightning bolt, but really it's supposed to be the brain and the spinal cord, brain stem and spinal cord. And I'm going to draw that for both the somatic system and the autonomic system. So here's the brain and spinal cord. And what I want to draw is just the basic structural differences between the somatic nervous system and the autonomic. First of all, the somatic nervous system is the nervous system that controls voluntary muscle in your body. So the target tissues for the somatic nervous system are skeletal muscles. So this represents one striated skeletal muscle cell. For the autonomic nervous system, the target tissues are involuntary muscles like cardiac, smooth muscle, and also glands. So to represent the target tissues for the autonomic nervous system, I'm just going to draw a heart, cardiac muscle tissue. So you've learned already that the somatic nervous system controls voluntary muscle, and the neurons for the somatic nervous system start in the gray matter of the spinal cord. Neurons these are multipolar neurons that begin with the cell body and dendrites. So I'm going to draw a neuron starting here in the spinal cord. Here's the dendrites and the cell body, and then the axon exits the spinal cord and continues all the way to the target tissue, where it ends in the axon terminals at the targets. So in the somatic nervous system, there is one neuron that connects your central nervous system to every single muscle cell. In the autonomic nervous system, it's not exactly the same. There are two neurons in the pathway. The first neuron begins in the brainstem and spinal cord, so I'm going to draw, again, a multipolar cell body and dendrites with an axon exiting the central nervous system. But then this neuron ends and synapses with a second neuron in the pathway. So we have a second multipolar neuron with dendrites and cell body that continues all the way to the target tissue. So in the autonomic pathway, there are two neurons in the pathway. And this neuron pathway would be surrounded by connective tissue. Neurons would be bundled together to form nerves. So there are autonomic nerves that exit the spinal cord and go to target tissues. Well, places where there are cell bodies in the nerve tissue is always swollen at that point. When cell bodies are clustered together, it makes for bulges on nerves that we call ganglia. So this represents an autonomic ganglion where cell bodies are found in the peripheral nervous system. In the somatic nervous system, there are no ganglia because there are no cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. Another big characteristic to note is whether these axons of each nervous system are myelinated or unmyelinated, and also what neurotransmitters do they secrete. So to represent myelination, I'm going to draw little Schwann cells, neurolimocytes, that are surrounding the axons of this somatic nervous system neuron. So in the somatic nervous system, the neurons are myelinated, and for their neurotransmitter that they secrete at their axon terminals, it is always acetylcholine. And you learned that in the muscle chapter, where we learned acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that always stimulates skeletal muscle tissue. In the autonomic nervous system, only the first neuron in the pathway is myelinated. We call this neuron the preganglionic neuron because it comes before the ganglion. And I'm going to draw myelination on this axon. because preganglionic neurons are always myelinated. Postganglionic neurons, the ones that come after the ganglion, are not myelinated. Also, the neurotransmitters are a little bit different. In the autonomic nervous system, preganglionic neurons always secrete acetylcholine, just like in the somatic nervous system. Postganglionic neurons can secrete sometimes acetylcholine or sometimes norepinephrine, which we abbreviate NE. So this diagram just summarizes the main structural differences between the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. And in your notes, there's a table that you're supposed to fill in that summarizes the differences by answering questions. So if you're looking at your notes on page 1, underneath Roman numeral 1 with the comparison of autonomic versus somatic, in that table it says, first of all, the number of neurons between the central nervous system and the effector organ. So if it's the somatic nervous system, remember there's only one neuron in that pathway. And if it's the autonomic nervous system, remember there's always two neurons in that pathway. For the location of the neuron cell bodies in the somatic nervous system, the cell bodies are all located in the central nervous system. Specifically, they're located in the gray matter of the spinal cord. And if you remember from the chapter on the spinal cord, they are always found in the anterior gray horn of the spinal cord. The autonomic nervous system neurons, the preganglionic neurons, begin in the spinal cord, and they always originate in the lateral gray horns of the spinal cord. The postganglionic neuron, though, is not located in the central nervous system. The cell bodies of the postganglionic nervous system are located in autonomic ganglia. Autonomic ganglia. Next in the chart, it asks for you to list the effectors, which is another name for asking the target tissues. So in the somatic nervous system, it's skeletal tissue, skeletal muscle tissue. And for the autonomic nervous system, it's cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. All involuntary organs. For the axon properties, you're supposed to know whether they are myelinated versus unmyelinated. In the somatic nervous system, remember that the axons are myelinated. In the autonomic nervous system, the preganglionic neuron is myelinated, but the postganglionic neuron is unmyelinated. Neurotransmitters secreted. Always in the somatic nervous system, all neurons secrete acetylcholine. In the autonomic nervous system, most secrete acetylcholine, but some secrete norepinephrine. And then lastly, you have to note that the somatic nervous system is under voluntary control, and the autonomic nervous system is involuntary. So that's the basic difference between the somatic and the autonomic nervous system. But next, we're going to describe just the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic